Welcome back, and I'd like to start our final entry with a callback. If you'll remember all the way back in the first installment of this series, I said that episode 4 was the key to understanding the whole series. More specifically, the tavern portion of said episode. During one's first time watching, it's easy to write this whole sequence off as some playful exposition. But as you come back to it again and again, you start to realize that all the show's themes and motifs are laid bare in these few scenes. We see the tavern keeper briefly going over the idea of archetypes. We have the central question of the show, when the villagers ask Wirt who he is. He waffles around for a bit. The villagers think he is the young lover, which is technically correct but not the whole picture. But eventually they realize that he is a pilgrim, a traveler on a sacred journey, as the butcher puts it. And this is about where it all started to come together for me, because somehow that phrase unlocked something in mind. And suddenly the whole series was put into perspective. As for what that journey is, that would be the hero's journey. In the previous 2 videos, we talked not only about archetypal characters in the series, but about archetypal events as well. A man named Joseph Campbell, a self-taught student of Jung, realized that these events and the order in which they occur can be studied in their own right. He was able to see the patterns that pop up again and again throughout all myths from all of the world's different cultures and societies, and make a science out of studying them. The main product of this study was the hero's journey, the cycle and the patterns that every mythological and literary hero follow. He was also able to see that this cycle is tied to the esoteric journey of the soul and Jung's process of individuation, and that this is the very reason this cycle is so prevalent throughout all the world's myths, to prepare the reader or listener for their own journey. In the general roadmap of the hero's journey, and in much of the scholarship surrounding it, the other world the heroes go to is explicitly called the unknown. It may also be the underworld in some myths, which would also make sense here since the boys are on the brink of death, or the spirit world, or any number of other names. Regardless of what it's called, it is the mythic stage that most of the movement and conflict in the story takes place in. Generally speaking, when Joseph Campbell laid out the general blueprint of the hero's journey, there were a few fixed elements that were present in every iteration. The initial call to adventure, supernatural aid, some sort of guardian meet them, crossing the threshold into the spirit world or mythic world, meeting a mentor of some sort, various challenges the hero must overcome, a descent into the land of the dead or the abyss, some sort of epiphany or revelation, atoning for past grievances, and finally returning to the original world from which they came. And of course, if we look at the show, it follows this blueprint almost to a T. There are a few deviations, yes, but they serve the overall purpose of the plot and themes. Let us begin with the beginning. In the land of the living, we see Greg issues the call to adventure in the form of frog hunting. He says that Wirt promised him, and that he should stay true to his word. Wirt, however, is too busy not talking to Sarah, and instead watching from the sidelines. So Greg, not to be upstaged, takes it upon himself to set Wirt down the path to enlightenment. Here it may seem like a bit of a stretch, but I'm willing to bet that Greg is Wirt's aid here as well. Think about it, he takes it upon himself to aid Wirt not only in setting off the chain of events that will cause him to end up in the unknown, but he also gets him into the party and distracts the graveyard gathering for Wirt as well. As a brief aside, my thinking is that because he stole the rock from the old lady's house, on Halloween night no less, that this is what set forth the rest of the events for the whole series. You can even see the rock at the beginning being taken, and then being put back at the very end, and on to the very start of their journey, the threshold. This one is a little tricky since it's split between the 1st and 9th episode, but from what we can see, it generally follows the same pattern set by the hero's journey. Usually in this stage, the heroes encounter the doorway or portal to the other world, or they encounter an event that makes them flee to the other world. For the boys, this is bungling the encounter at the graveyard and subsequently going over the eponymous garden wall. The name of the graveyard is the Eternal Garden, and dodging the oncoming train. Trains in media and folklore are often symbolic of death, and the song that plays during this sequence even alludes to that. While they might have dodged the train, in their haste they tumbled into the nearby creek and were seemingly knocked out, thus beginning their journey in the unknown. Brief footnote on this one. I think it's very telling that the name of the whole series is a reference to a pivotal stage in the hero's journey. Over the garden wall, going over the threshold into the unknown, etc. To me at least, this just further points to the idea that the creator, Patrick McHale, explicitly had the hero's journey in mind when making the series. And for the next stage, we have encountering Thir Mentor, which is, of course, the woodsman. This ties into his characterization as the wise old man from our previous entry. In other myths and stories, this type of character functions as a guide through the underworld/spirit world and tells the heroes how to navigate this new terrain. He also acts as a mentor, giving the heroes advice on the do's and do-nots of this other world. To return to the woodsman, he meets the boys as soon as they drop into the unknown, and then regularly runs into them throughout the series. He regularly tries to give them advice or help them along as a mentor would, however. Only one of the boys, Greg, is receptive to it. Next, we see the boys receive their supernatural aid/helper in the form of Beatrice. This ties into her characterization as the anima in the last entry. Often in myths and legends, this character comes as a sort of supernatural aid, something that could have only come to them in the world of the supernatural. They also very often have a crucial piece of information, or present some sort of test to the hero, and likewise with Beatrice. While she may be a bit standoffish and taciturn to begin with, she does try to steer the boys in a positive direction, or at least what she thinks is a positive direction. In this case, the crucial piece of information and the test might be one and the same. They seemingly need to get to Adelaide so she can get them out of the woods, the info, while she's actually tricking Beatrice into kidnapping the boys, the test. As for being a helper, she often tries to get Wirt to see the error of his ways and to confront his flaws, in spite of Wirt's best efforts not to, the whole third episode being a prime example of this. We now come to the challenge portion of the cycle. Throughout the first half or so of the series, the boys are faced with various challenges presented by the unknown's inhabitants. Through these, they learn things not just about the unknown and their situation, but also things about themselves. Often in the course of the journey, there are tests, some of which the heroes might fail and some of which they may pass. One of these tests comes in Chapter 4, where the boys notice that Beatrice is missing, and so go look for her in the woods. They find Beatrice likely being helped by the woodsman, but they mistakenly think that he is the one that batted her down. They have a brief altercation with him and then escape as the Edelwood tree burns, and the beast laughs on from the shadows. This would be an example of a test they failed. One example of a test that they didn't fail necessarily, but sort of stumbled their way through, was the encounter with Adelaide. Both boys were tricked by Beatrice into falling into Adelaide's trap, as well as Beatrice too to some extent, although maybe fooled is the right word. Both boys end up totally enveloped by Adelaide's web, and Beatrice is the one in this instance to set things right. This normally would be called the third act low point, but Campbell sees it as sort of like being eaten by a whale, or similarly being in the belly of the beast. Both of the boys and Beatrice too have now experienced a brush with failure, and subsequently know what the stakes are now if they fail. After meeting and being tested by a few more of the unknown's inhabitants, we come to the atonement stage in the lead up to the finale. This is the only part of the cycle that's a little out of order, usually coming after the revelation. For Wirt, his atonement comes from his apology to Greg for being a bad brother, blowing him off and blaming him for his own shortcomings. Greg, being the stand-up guy that he is, accepts his apology, only to shortly after seemingly succumb to his treeification. Wirt, having finally taken responsibility, urgently tries to free Greg from the branches before being confronted by the beast. Now we come to the lowest point for both boys, the abyss. This is denoted in the show by the near-complete absence of color during the final encounter with the beast. They are at their lowest, but also deepest point. And just like Dante and his journey, when you're going through hell, the only way out is through. Wirt especially must draw on all that he's learned up to this point in order to thwart the beast and his plans. One thing I think is interesting is that trying to fight the beast physically is presumably impossible. We see the woodsman has tried for hours to chop the beast down to no avail. Only when Wirt realizes he's being tricked do the tables turn. The beast's defeat comes not from physical prowess, but from realizing one's own inner strength, and of course calling the beast's bluff. Which brings us to the revelation. This is the part in the hero's journey where the hero gains a sudden flash of insight, sometimes from a god or supernatural source and sometimes from an internal source. For Wirt, this flash of insight is represented by a distinct ding sound. This is where Wirt's newly acquired wisdom finally kicks in. He finally internalizes all the lessons he's learned throughout his time in the unknown, things he learned from Beatrice, from the woodsman, from Greg, and most importantly, things about himself. All of this culminates with him overpowering the beast with his will, so to speak, and thusly revealing the beast's weakness, that he relies only on fear. With the main evil soundly defeated, we come to the final portion of the journey, the return. This is represented by the boys waking up and exiting the river, the water representing the unconscious and the unknown. The boys, especially Wirt, have finally earned their freedom from the unknown by virtue of their newfound wisdom. And as I mentioned in the last video, Wirt is able to finally use his newfound courage and strength of will to ask out Sarah, even if it will take a little getting used to. This is also the point in the hero's journey where usually the hero shares his hard-fought wisdom with his tribe or village. But funnily enough, it seems Greg is the one doing this, not Wirt. And with that, dear viewers, we close our three-part series on one of my most beloved pieces of media, and without a doubt one of the best animated pieces of all time. An instant classic from the second it came out, if not for all the reasons I've detailed in this series, but just for the fact that it's so expertly crafted. The literary allusions, all the different symbolism, and just the vibe in general. Also, I know it's a little past due for Over the Garden Wall content, but I figured Candlemas, the original release date of this if you're watching in the future, would have to do. And besides, hopefully all of these will gain some traction this upcoming fall. Regardless, if you've stuck around this long, all I can say is still the same thank you that I've been saying since the beginning, except multiplied threefold now. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for watching, and see you again soon.